Hi, everybody. It's Kathleen from A Great Good Place for Books, and I'm calling tonight we welcome Jessica Francis Kane, who wrote one of my very favorite books of last year called Rules for Visiting. And we also have Samantha online.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jessica.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Can you tell me what inspired you to write this book? Because it's so unique. I mean, that's what really got me, was it really resonated with trying to reconnect. Like, I think we all get detached during the,
Yes.
in our modern world.
Well, I think it was two strands that came together in my mind over time. The first inspiration goes back to the story of a writer who I admired, did not know personally, but admired and was following her career. And she died tragically in 2003, actually, when she was promoting her first novel. And that story and what happened next, which was McSweeney's, the journal and internet site, turned their site at the time, this was 2003, into a tribute page for her. And anyone who had known her could write a memory, write about her and a memory of her. And I followed that for weeks and then months as people wrote about this writer. Amanda Davis was her name. And I became kind of obsessed with it. And what struck me was what a good friend she was to so many people. She seemed to be a person who was just gifted at friendship in a way that seemed extraordinary and unusual to me. And I was, as I said, I really became sort of obsessed with her story. I printed out the website, all these tributes at one point, and it was a stack of paper maybe like this. And I put it in a folder labeled friendship. And I thought that someday I would do something with it, but I didn't know what. And then time passed, and I worked on some other books, and I had two children, but always I had this idea that I wanted to do something with the idea of friendship. And at the same time, the world was changing, and our ideas of friendship were changing as the rise of social media happened. And I started following articles and clipping articles and adding those to the folder about what social media was and wasn't doing for friendship, and how could it be the case that we had friends, we had hundreds of friends on Facebook, but how many friends did we really spend time with in real life? And the stories would suggest that spending time with friends was one of the first things people were cutting when they got really busy. And so I was fascinated by that. I put all those articles in my folder, and then eventually I sat down one summer day, I guess this was about 2016 now, and started writing the story of a woman who I decided would take all of this advice we get about friendship and how good it is for us and do something about it. Actually go visit friends, which was something we used to be able to do before the pandemic. And I joke that now the story seems a little bit like, magic realism, because we can't just go visit 4 friends in 4 different states now. But at the time I wrote the book, you could. And I think a lot right now about how I hope, now we all are kind of back to being dependent on our screens to stay in touch with people. But I think, even though, thank goodness we have that, I think what everybody wants to do most when we can again is visit with their friends. And May's story may resonate in that way.
Mm. Well, one of the things that really stayed with me was the perception of who we are and who we think we are. One of her friends who she thought was this wonderfully powerful, successful woman, ends up, her life is imploding around her, and she comes in the middle of it. And then it was, just the different people as she met along the way. It was like they weren't who she thought they'd be.
Yeah. She herself is a character I tried to make warmer than she seems. She seems prickly at first, and she is, but you realize that there's a warmth there that she's just kind of lost touch with because of some of her story. That is why she's distanced herself from the world. But she wonders, can you change? Can you get better at friendship with practice? The way you get better at cooking or singing if you practice. And And it's true. I wanted to make her friends, you know, in a way that didn't seem too studied. I wanted them to represent different choices in life. You know, people who have children, don't have children, center their careers or not, have married or not, so that, because May is so interested in how to settle in your life and how to be happy with your life, and she wants to think about what that looks like in different modes.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to actually jump in because her character, I have to be honest, I picked the book up when Kathleen originally was like, you have to read this book. And I read a few pages, and I have to be honest, I was like, I don't know if I like her very much. And then it was so funny because as I was looking at different reviews and stuff, to kind of refresh and get back to it, one of them was the NPR interview, and that was exactly what they talked about. And that what happens, of course, is she really grows on you, and she becomes this really endearing character, and you do see her warmth emerge. So I wondered, could you talk a little bit about writing her as a character? Did you kind of know she was prickly from the outset? Like, how did she evolve for you as you were writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad the NPR interview encouraged you, review encouraged you. I was a big fan of that review. My publisher was was a little alarmed because it opens and it seems like it isn't going to be a good review, and then it really is a very good review.
It is.
But I loved it. So I set out to write a prickly character. I wanted to do that. I had been very inspired by a couple of books, Olive Kitteridge, of course, and that character by Elizabeth Strout, and another one was Claire Massoud's The Woman Upstairs, who's another very difficult first-person female narrator. And I just thought those two characters were terrific, and I felt like I hadn't seen enough first-person female narrators who are difficult, who get to be difficult and get to drive their own stories. They're not responding to other things. They are driving their own stories, and I wanted to do that, and so I set out with that intent, and it's, you know, it is true. Readers who stick with the book generally like her by the end, but I think I've lost some readers who don't stick long enough. And I remember asking my editor at one point, you know, should I know, it was actually after the hardcover and for the paperback, I said, should I do something? Should I make some edits to warm her up sooner? And my editor said, no, not at all. She said, people are just used to getting everything too soon, you know, too easily. Your book makes them work a bit. So
I love that.
No, I mean, I love the fact that she was prickly. I love the fact that she wasn't an easy character to really, you know, how some characters you fall in love with immediately.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
But it's like, you see a little bit of May as she progresses, but even in the beginning, you know, her connection to the earth and things like that make her warm. And it's, you wonder, here's a woman who spent most of her adult life among nature. She has not sought out people.
That's right.
She has pretty much done her own thing and lived kind of a very isolated life. And then when she takes the opportunity and decides to go see what's out there, you kind of see her blossom. As each chapter, she becomes more engaged with life.
Right. And then, so I remember as I was writing, it was hard to, I wanted the town that she returns to each time, her hometown where she's growing up, where she grew up and where she's still living with her elderly father. I thought this needs to be a character just as much. She needs to be rooted, as it were. There are so many plant metaphors in the book. And I thought, I want her to ultimately find that she's more connected to her home than she realizes. And there are friends there too that she's overlooked. And so that all had to come out too. And, you know, I myself am an introvert. And I've been asked a lot, you know, did you travel this way before writing the book? And I've had to say, well, you know, not so deliberately. I didn't set out on a year's journey to visit friends in the same way, but the book was in part written as a kind of a love letter to the 5 friends I dedicate it to, who are my fortnight friends, my oldest, dearest friends, who I think held on to me at times in my life when I wasn't as good at holding on to them. And I'm so grateful now that I have them still in my life. And the book, you know, I wanted to honor those friendships and write about what those kinds of old friendships mean.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I think one of the things that I was so struck by her character is you get a little glimmer, you get several of them, but the one that pops up was I can't remember which friend who reminds her what her childhood bedroom was like. Because in addition to the town being a character, which it really is, I love that you phrase it that way. I think each home that she visits has its own character. And so you've got the one friend who works really hard to decorate and has this beautiful sort of, you know, Instagram ready home. And then the other one where it's kind of perfect, but maybe a little bit cold, and et cetera. But I can't remember which friend reminds her, but she said, it's like she forgot this part of herself, that she actually did like to create space in a way, because you get the sense that her home now, she's like, she's not dealing with it.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's Lindy, the first one. Yeah, that's right. It's true. She has forgotten, and she's partly sort of, you know, she's bound to this sad house, this house she grew up in, that she's still in, and still her father has moved to the basement apartment and she's living in the main house. But this is the house she grew up in, and there are some sadnesses in her past that are still very much, that have become part of who she is. And so she's very bound to this house that she thinks of as being sad, and she's not remembering what it had been until she goes to see her friends, and that begins to help her. That's right. And she's you know, I got really interested in how people do, you know, how your home is a reflection of who you are, and that can, I mean, that can be overwhelming, you know. And I think sometimes, you know, I was thinking, and this happens in New York City a lot. I don't know if it happens elsewhere, but people have a tendency to meet out. You meet friends out at a restaurant, and it's not as common for people to have dinner parties. And I think it's because sometimes it's just easier to meet out, so that you don't have to straighten up, and you don't have to, you don't have people judging your decorating decisions. But that said, you know, I wrote an essay about the intimacy that comes with being in someone's home, and that is nice. It is sharing a part of yourself, and if you can share that part of yourself, it can be a way to be, you know, to make closer friends. And I think people should.
I can say with the pandemic, I've actually reconnected with some really old friends who, I mean, we weren't completely out of touch, but we are now regularly in touch. And, you know, it's amazing to see how easy you fall back into that ease of that relationship. And I noticed that about when May was visiting her friends, that with some of them, she really just fell right back into that ease of, oh, you know me.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I too have, you know, I have these regular Zoom chats now with friends who, I suppose we could have been doing this before the pandemic. They live, you know, far away from me, but we never did. I didn't know about Zoom before the pandemic. Now we have a regular weekly chat, and I'm much more involved in their day-to-day lives actually than I was before, even though it's all over the screen. I think that has limitations. I mean, I'm sort of desperate to go visit them when this is all over, but thank goodness we have it, and there is something. I do think we're also seeing, you know, we're zooming into each other's homes, and there's something that's a little more real about the screen, the way we're using it for friendship now, than the perfect Instagram posts and the perfect Facebook, you know, pictures and things like that.
I really loved how you wove so much of that sort of commentary on where we are now with social media. And so there was the moment where she's just left the first friend's house. She's left Lindy's house, and Lindy posts it. And so then May has this sort of meta awareness of like, it's for me, sort of, but it's also a message to this larger community. And then she gets a little like, what do I do? How do I respond? And like, is it weird? You know, and I just thought that was such a great detail. And then I also loved doesn't she reflect on how, or maybe you reflect on it because you tell the story at the end, but this is so funny. The two stories is that the fact that these posts about the author didn't have a lot of noise around them. They were just because of
yes.
time. Is that from the actual story? Or is that in the novel?
Actually, both. So both. That's right. I that happened in real life, and also May reflects on that because it's the same time frame that the site was set up without comments and prior to the like button or anything like that.
And so I just that you reminded me that was even a thing. I'm like, oh wow, there was a time where you would just there it would be, and I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah, it was quieter. It was
time.
Well, Amanda taught over at Mills College.
I did know that. Yeah.
And vicariously, she was connected through a lot of people that we know in the book world.
I bet.
And I remember the night she died. We were at a party over at the Lake Merritt, and somebody came in and said there'd been a plane crash and Amanda was gone. And it was amazing to watch how many people just kind of lost it.
Yeah.
And it's like, and they all said she was their best friend, which I thought that was such an eye opener.
She was the center of so many circles. I mean, she just was, it seems, and I wish I'd known her. I just, the stories of her are so amazing. And she was extraordinary. And it's funny. And I had just had my first baby and I felt like I'd fallen off the face of the planet, feeling very kind of isolated. And I lived in Charlottesville at the time. And she'd done what I wanted to do. She published a collection of short stories and she was out for her first novel. And I had published a collection of short stories, but hadn't yet managed to write my first novel. So I was following her with keen interest. And then that happened and it was just, so devastating. We should say the name of her book. Her novel is called Wonder When You'll Miss Me. Still in print, I think. And
and then the other one was Circling the Drain.
Was the short stories, so.
And her short stories are amazing. They're really magnificent.
They really are.
And you just think to yourself, what would have happened if she'd gotten the opportunity to have a long career?
I agree. I know.
It's like you definitely felt that it was cut short.
She was on her way. Right. I know. So that I didn't realize Mills College was near you, but I don't know the geography of California so well. But
it's in Oakland.
Oh, right. That's right. Okay. Oh.
Yeah. So I don't know, Kathleen, if we were going to ask Jessica to read a passage, I don't know if you would do that. And I also, at some point, would love to circle back to the natural world and the theme of trees.
Oh, sure.
That's woven through. And now, of course, I'm totally obsessed with the yew in Scotland. I want to go. I looked it up on the internet. I was like, I want to go see the yew. Anyway.
Well, I did. I picked a short passage to read if you'd like me to. I thought I would read from the section where she is buying her suitcase, and because I thought wouldn't we all like to have a new suitcase right now and get ready for a trip. And so she's just beginning to get ready for this adventure she's set for herself, and she goes to buy a suitcase, which she will name Grendel, after Beowulf's monster, the first monster in English literature. And so she's in a Walmart, and she's, and this will give you a sense of May's voice if you haven't read the book yet. So this chapter is called Baggage. The day I bought Grendel, there was a sparrow in the Walmart. I spent a while choosing my suitcase, but I spent longer watching the sparrow's small black beak, tilting this way and that, questioning the high white ceiling full of fluorescent lights. The front doors had an airlock, which would have been hard for a bird to navigate, so I assumed he must have come in from the garden center, a dismal area adjacent to the parking lot with only the most average evergreen shrubs and seasonal chrysanthemums, genus Dendanthruma, in 3 colors, 2 yellow, rusty orange, and bad purple. Mounds of forced hardy mums plunked along curbs and into garden beds this time of year are my least favorite tradition of the season. I'm not a fan of using annuals in landscaping in general, and to use a hardy mum, which is a perennial, as an annual is an affront. Chrysanthemums were first cultivated in China as far back as the 15th century, and along with the plum blossom, the orchid, and bamboo, it was considered one of the 4 noble plants. Now the mum is to flowers as the red delicious is to apples, a ubiquitous fraud. The mums outside Walmart were arranged in long single color lines on aluminum bleachers facing the parking lot, their fall from grace complete. The only thing worse might be the grocery store orchid. A young employee mistook my staring for interest. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. She was wearing garden gloves and holding a trowel, but it wasn't clear that she'd been planting. She was very clean. "Oh, no, thank you," I said. "Hard to choose, isn't it?" She looked at the mums. "They're all so pretty. I did yellow and purple this year." Back inside, the sparrow wasn't hard to find. He was making quick trips from the airspace above pet supplies to bedding and back, which seemed like a sound plan. Anyone in pet supplies would be sympathetic to his plight. But when I walked over there, the section was empty. I stood beneath him for a while. The archway to the garden center was large but low, and he didn't seem to be aware of it. I stood next to the dog food, projecting flight lines. It seemed possible for him to fly out that way, but he looked confused by the lights and perhaps the Christmas music. So I thought just a bit.
So good.
Bit of May.
Yeah.
That was great.
Such a good voice. She's got such a good voice. I also was wondering about, she mentions, I don't want to give too much away, but she does sort of mention several times the culture of her own family. And right, so I think that's one of the many interesting things about her, is that she sees so many of these different forces that have contributed to kind of where she is at this time in her life. And just the sort of power of and sort of the comments her father makes, like that's just not who we are as a family, or those kinds of things. And
yes.
And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, and it's tied back to the fact that she really makes this conscious decision to kind of overcome sort of parts of her nature, parts of her history, and really, because I think about how often I read an article and I feel inspired, but do I actually like make a plan?
Right.
Like I'm really going to do this with this this way
Right.
she does. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, her past is very present in her life, and she and I think her concern is that she sees in herself tendencies that remind her of her mother, and she and you understand that May's mother didn't have a lot of friends, and so May, as she's meeting midlife, begins to remember her mother at midlife, and starts to worry that there may be a pattern repeating, and is determined to avoid it. And so between that and the newspaper articles that tell her what, which as we know are true, that spending time with friends can lower blood pressure and help relieve chronic pain and relieve depression and help you live longer. I mean, these are all proven by scientific studies. It's quite amazing. But yes, it's not, we're all willing to eat kale if they tell us it's healthy, but do any of us, determinedly plan to visit friends and spend time with them because we know it will actually benefit our health? That's less done. So that was my starting premise, was my character will decide to just embrace that and see where it takes her.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
Now, Jessica, are you a gardener?
I am an amateur gardener at best, yes. I grew up gardening with my grandmother in Connecticut, actually, where I am at the moment. And I wish now I paid a lot more attention. My grandmother was the kind of gardener who could go along in a small patch and take forever telling you just every plant and the Latin name, and but now I wish I'd listened more. But I did garden with her, and so I think, but it wasn't something I did as a young adult, again, as I approach middle age, or I'm firmly in middle age at this point, I love it more and more. And so I've started a garden here in Connecticut, and I am learning to embrace plant death, which is something May is told in the book. It's hard. Gardening is hard. I have a rhododendron and an azalea, a rhododendron and a hydrangea, both of which I mispruned last year, so they didn't bloom at all. But they've bloomed this year because I learned, and now I have blooms, and it's been like a miracle to have them bloom again after having not bloomed because of something I did. So to answer your question, all the gardening research in the book, I really did as research. And since writing the book, I've actually gardened much more. So it's something I'm becoming rather than what I was when I wrote the book.
We talk about this, I think, a lot in the store, where it's amazing that some of these novels that are landing right now, it's like, was this person psychic? Like, it hits like all the right notes. And maybe that's always true, but it just feels especially true. And so one of the things I loved is I have so many friends who are starting gardens, who are, that all of a sudden, I have a friend who's kept chickens for a long time, and she was trying to get something for the chickens. She goes, you can't get anything for chickens anymore. Everybody bought chickens, and so we're all
everyone's at home.
Right. It's like we're all relating to this, and I love the plant death comment. Like, I planted a cucumber. I was so proud of it. It made 3 beautiful cucumbers, and then I did something to it. I don't know what I did. I kind of killed it. I don't know.
It's so hard to know, and yes, and I mean. And I feel terrible. My grandmother used to pet the plants that were near her, where she drank her coffee in the morning. She would like pet them while she drank her coffee and read the newspaper.
That's so sweet.
And so, you don't want plants to die, but they do, and you just have to go on. You just have to soldier on. Yes. So actually, in New York, I have a little balcony where I've tried to plant something from every place where I've lived. So I tried to plant a crepe myrtle there, which it turns out they do not like windy balconies, so that died. I tried a rose, but it is very hard to keep. You can grow a rose in a pot, apparently, but it's hard because they like so much water, and the pots you're just constantly watering the rose. And apparently I didn't constantly water the rose. So anyway, yeah, but maybe one day I'll have a real green thumb.
Yeah. So Kathleen, I don't know what, in terms of timing, is it a good time to ask about Jessica's other reads, or?
Yeah, I think that's the perfect time.
Okay. Great.
So when you asked me to choose 3 books to recommend, I kind of just went to 3 of the most recent books I've read, and then I realized that they all have a theme of friendship, which seems sort of interesting given my book is about friendship. So the first one is Saint Ivo by Joanna Hirshon, which came out a few months ago. And this novel is it's very powerful, short. It's about it spans a weekend when 2 couples, friends, longtime friends, but they've been out of touch for many years, get back in touch and spend a weekend together. And it's the weekend circles around a secret at the core of one of the couples, and it's very interesting to watch the dynamics, particularly between the 2 women as they navigate that secret. And it's just a really wonderful novel about friendship and spending time with friends. And I highly recommend it. So that's St. Ivo.
Okay.
Then this is probably familiar to many, but I just read it. And this is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. It's the Pulitzer Prize winner this year. I was late to it, I guess. I feel as if the rest of the world has already read this book, but I just read it and was blown away. I feel like I'll never be the same. It's also about it features a friendship between 2 boys at a reform school in Florida, which is, the story is based on a true story about a terrible reform school in northern Florida that was in the news a few years ago for a secret graveyard that was found there. And I guess Colson Whitehead saw these newspaper articles and was inspired to write this story. And since, you know, we're all thinking about race in this country and all the things that we've gotten wrong, it's a great time to read this book. And then the third is called Austen Years. This is actually a memoir by Rachel Cohen. And this is a book that's dear to me for a number of reasons. It tells the story of a time in Rachel's life when she was, her father was dying and she was starting her own family. So she was at a inflection point in her life, saying goodbye to her father and beginning her own family. And she found herself, her reading life, which had always been very important to her, was paralyzed. And the only books she could read were the 6 Austen novels. And she read them over and over and over again. And so this is a memoir of that time when she was doing nothing but reading Austen and starting her family. And I think it's beautiful. It has very important things to say about life, domestic life, friendship. And it is also the case, full disclosure, that Rachel Cohen is a dear friend of mine and is one of the friends I dedicated my book to. The Rachel in the dedication is this Rachel. So this book comes out next Tuesday, is its pub date, and I recommend it very much.
Thank you.
So those are my 3.
And we'll have that in the store too. And I know Mike will put something up there about, connecting it to this talk.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That would be lovely.
So Jessica, what are you working on now?
Well, gosh, I can actually answer that question with some relief for the first time in a few months. I can finally say that the next novel is underway. It's been in my head for a couple of years, but I, for various reasons, hadn't gotten started in a real way. And then the pandemic hit, and I thought that would be a good time to start writing. No, it wasn't. But now, now that the pandemic is well underway, and I don't know what changed. It's certainly very distressing on a daily basis, but I got my concentration back, and I'm now working on a novel that is, well, I can't say too much about it because it's just so new, and I worry that if I say too much, the wind will go out of my sails. But I am working on a new novel. There will be a new novel, I believe, in a few years' time, maybe.
Now, what is your writing process? Are you someone who takes a really long time? Are you a rewriter? How would you describe yourself?
Each book has been different, but I think I'm beginning to see a pattern, which is that I take notes for a long time. I'm working, it seems to me I have a lag time of a few years. And, like Rules for Visiting, the first notes for Rules for Visiting date to 2003. And then,
wow.
and the notes and the articles I started saving, right? And then the book didn't come out till 2019. The book I'm working on now, the dates to the summer of 2016, when I read an article about the writer Penelope Fitzgerald, who is one of my favorite writers. And I started taking notes about her life. And and now what are we? Now we're in 2020 and I've just started writing. So I think what I do is something sticks in my head, and I start taking notes, and then sometime later it becomes a book. And I write a very messy first draft and count a lot on revision. So which always feels scary, but.
Now, is this going to be another first person account?
No, this one I think is going to be back to third person, like my first novel. My first novel was in third person, and most of my short stories are in third person. So May was a departure for me, and it took me a long time to figure out how to write a first person novel and get the arc right. So that was another actually goal I had when I was writing that book, was that I wanted to see if I could do that. But now this book is sounding like it's going to be third person, close third person.
Did you, so you described early on when you had your short stories, but you hadn't written a novel. Did you participate in writers' workshops to kind of make that transition, or were you just relying mostly kind of on your own steam to do that? How was that part of your process?
A little bit of both. I was an English major in college, and then I thought a lot about going to an MFA program, but ultimately kept deciding not to apply. I wasn't sure how I would pay for it, and I instead went to New York City and did what I like to call the other MFA, which was I worked in publishing. So I got a job as a publicity assistant and worked for some years for W.W. Norton, and you know, I was very close to publishing, and I took workshops in the evening at a place called the Writer's Studio. And any you know, thing like that I could find, I would try to do, but mostly I was working in publishing. And I kept thinking, well, if I can get a manuscript together, I know some people, I have people who might read it, and that's just how I worked for a number of years until I had the stories that made up my first collection called Bending Heaven, which I did ultimately show to an editor who I'd worked with, and actually with the intention that he might help me order the stories for a prize submission I was going to make with it. But he made an offer to publish it instead. And so that was published by Counterpoint way back in 2002.
It must have been one of Jack's first lists.
Yeah, it was Jack Shoemaker. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good old Jack.
Well,
So after Norton, I worked for Jack at Counterpoint. I was a publicist there for a little bit, and then left to move to London when my husband's job moved. And I'd been writing in London, and then I got back in touch with Jack, and he published my first collection. So that started it off. I never did do an MFA, and I've kind of been writing ever since, and you know, raising the
kiddos. So one author we spoke to made a distinction that I'm not a writer, so it was a new distinction, but it made so much sense, was the difference between being a writer and an author. And we talked about how some writers love being writers but don't love being authors, and he thinks of authors as the public face of what you have to do. So I wonder, for you, you mentioned you're an introvert, and that doesn't always mean that you don't enjoy, you know, socializing, but how has it been for you to try to straddle that? And has it maybe in some ways been easier to do it on these formats? What's that been like for you, that part?
It's true. It's funny. I think it's something I'm not I mean, I can do the public side, the author tour and the events. It takes a toll. I find that it takes a kind of energy that I'm not, that doesn't come naturally. So I gear myself up for these things, and I can do them, and I even enjoy them. But then I'll find that, you know, afterwards I'm quite tired. I'm more deflated than probably is normal. I think that's just part of being a writer, and that is the difference between being a writer and being an author. So I've made peace with that. I really feel that this is important. This is part of the job too. You know, right before this event started, I got a letter from Michael Barnard of Rakestraw Books, in which he was thanking clearly a number of us who have done events for him in this format, in this time. And it was just, you know, he just made the point that he thanked us for being flexible and for embracing new forms, and that, you know, he said, this is helping us sell books and stay in business, and we're so grateful to you for being willing to do this. And I thought, yes, exactly, this is why we're doing it, because it is a community, and it's part of the job, and so I've come to like it. I just, you know, the toll it takes is just part of the job.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks for having me. I hope to do maybe in the after, I can do an in-store event for you one day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I hope so, Jessica. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And Sam, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. This was great. Such a pleasure to meet you,
Thank
Jessica.
you.
And have a wonderful night, everybody. And this will be up on the website very soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.